Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join us for our session this morning. We're going to talk about a hot topic in the industry right now, which is modernizing security operations. And my colleague, Brad, and I have been working across both our federal and our commercial market for many years, driving cybersecurity operations. And we were going to start this morning talking about the current state in terms of what we're seeing out there. Brad, you want to go ahead and share some thoughts there?
Yeah, sure. Good rule of Booz Allen. Your name is Brad, you're in cyber. So starting off, we'll kind of talk about four things in the current state that we have as trends that sometimes sound like challenges, but really are opportunities. The first, and you just had the group in front of you talking about the changing threat landscape. Worm-enabled ransoms, things intended for one industry impacting others, and things like information sharing are great for that. But being at machine speed with threat intelligence and monitoring that threat landscape. I think the last conversation really focused on a couple of topics with that. The idea of context is really important in responding to that threat landscape. The second area that is a big trend that we see is the expanding attack surface. It's not just the expansion of IT to cloud, mobility, but you heard about it from the last group a little bit, into secure OT environments. Connected products, connected platforms, the Internet of Things, or the Industrial Internet of Things, ICS and SCADA. This is making the jobs of your CISO and your ops managers double, triple, sometimes an order of magnitude more difficult to understand what's out there, what's connected, and then understand how to defend against that.
Yeah, you know, just in terms of the expanding attack surface, just a couple observations. One, we do a lot of work in the financial services sector, and I was talking to some of the clients there. And when I was talking to them about some of their biggest concerns in cybersecurity, it was interesting when they said, we're really concerned with our building control systems. And I paused, and the reason is all of these industrial control systems, really, they've never baked in security, and they're all extremely vulnerable. And what the financial services were finding is adversaries were attacking their building control systems and then moving laterally onto their enterprise networks. The other thing that has been interesting to me looking at the expanding attack surface is how adversaries are moving into manufacturing and the OT environment. And those environments are it's like the Smithsonian of information technology. One of our clients sent me a list of all their assets and devices in their OT environment. And they had operating systems dating back to 1995, Windows NT. And so this expanding attack surface, these assets are extremely vulnerable. And by the way, if there's every minute of downtime is costing these organizations hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars.
Yeah. So as the attack surface gets bigger, the industry, including ourselves, are responding to that with new tools and more data to look at that. And in some cases, as you try to transform and realize next generation security operations, you're flooded with point solutions and data. And within that, how do you not only survive within that environment, but thrive with those? In some cases, that's causing us to partner with industry leaders like Splunk. Just last month, we released a co-developed product around threat intelligence, fusing that into the SIM, where instead of point solutions, fusing together multiple tools together to make the job of the operator easier.
Yeah, one of the interesting things with the tool environment, and we're involved in the CDM program, and we've spent a lot of time, we have a large lab, we have lots of tools, and we're vetting and validating them. But what's interesting is, so are our adversaries. Sophisticated actors have lab environments. They have the tools installed. They understand how we're building rule-based detection logic, and it's table stakes for them to evade that. And when I go into a lot of security operations centers today, I think about one client that was actually breached twice. And the second time we went in and we looked at, and they had an instance of ArcSight. And we looked at all of their SIM rule sets and their detection logic across the enterprise. And they were all using out-of-the-box rule sets. And Brad talked about threat actors are constantly evolving their TTPs. And one of the things that we're seeing is a lot of times folks are relying on tools with out-of-the-box configurations that aren't tuned or tailored to the emerging and evolving threats.
Yeah, so even adding on top of the tools, so I've kind of walked through 3 challenges, and the 4th one, and we'll talk a little bit about some things that we've seen that are working against these, is we have the changing landscape, surfaces getting bigger, tools are proliferating. The hardest thing is lack of talent. There's just not enough talent to respond to all those challenges. So at a time, it can seem like a bad time to be a CISO. It could be a bad time to be in operations because you're just waiting for the bad thing to happen. But to flip it a little bit, it's also a great opportunity to do things differently and to think about some of the things that are working out there, both commercially and federally, and sharing that information. So Brad, you want to talk about some of the things that we're seeing that are working and some of those best practices?
Yeah, so when I'm talking to leads of security operations organizations, I usually frame the conversation around in 2 perspectives. One, first thing you want to do is be effective, and the second is you want to be efficient. And so when we talk about how to be more effective in terms of security operations, from our perspective, it starts by being intelligence driven. And so we talked about actors constantly evolving their TTPs, and we talked about SIMs with old rule sets. And so, step 1 is, how do you tailor and build detection logic more behavior-based that models the threats and the TTPs of today and tune your tools and your sensors with that detection logic. So step 1 is being intelligence-driven. The other area from effectiveness and the federal side especially is programs like CDM. CDM the train is moving. We're starting to see a lot of successes across the federal government, and CDM puts the foundation in place that allows you to transform an organization from compliance to more risk-driven. And so we see, the next step to being more effective is building upon CDM and operationalizing CDM, to be able to take that data, fuse it into your security operations center, and using that to better inform the detection of advanced adversaries and threats. Which sort of leads me to the last point around effectiveness, which is applying advanced hunting techniques. When we go into a security operations center today, in many cases, folks are sitting there just triaging events, waiting for events and alerts to pop up on the screen and get an IR team to go out and respond. And in most cases, that's too late. A couple years ago, we were supporting one of the major commercial breaches, and they were getting 1 billion events into their security operations center, and their analysts were sitting there triaging these events. But when they looked at their screen, it was just a big blinking, a big set of blinking red lights, and the SOC analysts didn't know where to begin, and they had a hard time being able to discern the difference between an event on a printer and an event on a point of sale system. And so by using things like CDM, you can put better context around your assets. And then once you start to collect a bigger corpus of data across your enterprise, you can start to apply some more advanced tradecraft, apply more offensive cybersecurity techniques on the defensive side to go out and proactively hunt across your enterprise. And Brad, I know you've been working on that. Do you want to talk a little bit about hunting? Yeah.
So kind of maybe the analogy a few years ago was looking for the needle in a haystack. I think signature-based detection kind of helps you with that. Now we're having to look for that piece of hay in the haystack that might not be the piece of hay that we think. We've had some recent examples where finding threat actors encrypting traffic on the out-of-band network to act and go east-west in areas where no detection logic will happen. So there still is a human need in this hunting equation. Humans to drive the hypothesis, supported by automation and a lot of analytics to drive them to find those threat actors. Most of the studies out there show 200 days of dwell time before detection, and that's what's reported. So a lot of large organizations and even medium-sized organizations are making the investment into human-based threat hunting, having platforms supporting that, but then still having the talent that can take offensive tradecraft to weed out those APTs in the environment. It is an investment that sounds like a little bit like the cherry on top of a sundae, but for those organizations that are making those investments, they are actually seeing huge returns back in improvements to their overall security and effectiveness.
Yeah, the other thing that we're seeing that I find quite interesting around hunting is a good example is the pharmaceutical community. And I've seen them start to partner together. Folks that in the market, in their daily business, are competing, competing, ferocious competitors. But in the cybersecurity world, they've recognized that, hey, we can't address this alone. And I see them actually partnering together, basically crowdsourcing detection logic and analytics across their different organizations, because they realize that they do have one common enemy, which is the advanced persistent threats that are trying to attack and compromise their enterprise. And they realize that they're not funded or have the resources to do it alone. So they're starting to crowdsource those analytics and starting to kind of share along common taxonomies like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, as a way to kind of catalog some of this detection logic and analytics. So just moving forward, we talked some about effectiveness. We talked about intelligence-driven. We talked about operationalizing CDM, and we talked about hunting. The next step, once you're effective, is the big question is how do you become more efficient? And we've helped modernize some commercial security operations centers and post-breach, and they became world-class. But the question was, okay, now that we're world-class isn't necessarily affordable. And how do we drive efficiencies? How do we drive cost out of our operations? And so we've helped them think through how can you actually determine how well your SOC performs. And one of the techniques that we've been using a lot is continuous red teaming. And so we spend a lot of time injecting synthetic attacks into their enterprise. We do this on a recurring basis, and we actually measure how long it takes their security operations team to respond. We use that to help them figure out, what high value assets are vulnerable, how solid is their detection logic, and how can they better improve their incident response processes to be able to attack or be able to address and respond to in a timely manner these emerging threats. At first, it's kind of threatening because the security operations team said, hey, you're auditing me. Everyone hates auditors, right? But what we found was, as you create a partnership, it becomes a game. And the red team is, going all out. We do it in most cases twice a month. And the security operations teams loves it because when it becomes a constructive dialogue, you can actually, iron sharpens iron. And, the two in partnership can really refine and modernize the security operations process.
Yeah. So we're tight on time. We appreciate the time this morning. Enjoyed the conversation. Really, for us, the reality of transforming operations is about realizing those effectiveness and efficiency gains. There's not a one-size-fits-all, but the opportunity's out there. And if we all kind of continue to work together, industry and our federal partnerships, we can tackle these challenges, not only survive, but thrive. So thank you for your time this morning.